Welcome, everybody, to How Voting Works. I'm Jessica Palumbo. I am the editor of Jacksonville Today, and I'm here for a conversation with all of you and Election Supervisor Jerry Holland. Thank you for coming out this evening on this Valentine's Day Eve. So, first of all, Supervisor of Elections Jerry Holland, he was elected last year to this position. He previously served in the same role for a decade. He has also been property appraiser and sat on our city council. So he himself has personally won how many elections?
8 out of 9.
Okay. And how many elections have you run during that time?
Well, running on, how many really supervisor elections? Over 30 countywide elections.
Okay, so this is not your first rodeo this year.
No.
So let's talk about your role to start. It is an elected position. You ran unopposed last year and were elected as a Republican in this position. In Duval County, just over a third of registered voters are registered as Republicans, 36%. So my question to you is, how important is that you're partisan, and how does every single voter know that you're going to treat every candidate and every voter exactly the same, regardless of their registration?
Well, I think it's very important from the standpoint of, one, when you take this role, you represent all voters. You know, we have about 640,000 voters in Duval County. And, I tell people I have one opportunity to be partisan, and that's just when I'm in the voting booth. Other than that, I represent all parties, all people, and try to be as transparent as humanly possible and really give them confidence that their vote is going to count.
And what is your role as election supervisor? What can and can't you do to influence our elections?
I have several roles within the job. One is, obviously, you're like the CEO of an office. We have 35 full-time employees. Then we have about 80 seasonal employees that work the call center, the warehouse. And then we have between 1,200 and 1,300 poll workers. So I am their CEO. I'm the boss of over everyone, but I have great staff members who are division chiefs within our office. We have a couple roles. One is, first, the voter registration. To be actively involved in the community, to see people registered. We go out into all the schools. In my previous 10 years, we registered over 68,000 students in our high schools. So it's an important part of the process is to get people involved in voting first by getting them registered. The next part of that whole process of elections is our candidates. I tell people, without candidates and voters, we really don't have anything to do. And so our candidates, important also that we encourage people from the standpoint of how easy it is to get into the process. That when they come in, they're treated special no matter what they're running for, no matter what party. And that's in order to, one, is to get them a comfort level. We also try to make sure our candidates understand all the laws because, again, we don't want a candidate to get in trouble. You know, there's finance laws, reporting laws. And then after our candidates are qualified and filed for, the next biggest thing is the elections. Within a 4-year term, I'll do at a minimum 7 countywide elections.
This calendar year, there are 3 elections that you'll be running. We'll get to that in a little bit. I want to talk about our polling places because those have changed since the last time we voted. And because of a lawsuit settlement, the number of precincts has changed. It went down in the countywide, to be more uniform across city council districts. And at the same time, the number of early voting locations went up, right? So what was the thinking behind where those early voting locations have been added?
Well, one thing is we want to make sure we have an equal distribution of voting sites. And that was the lawsuit, was under the Equal Protection Clause, where you wouldn't have one city council district that had 19 precincts and another one with 9 because there wasn't an equal access to voting. So we settled the lawsuit by mitigating that we would have a minimum of 10, but no more than 12, so the medium is 11. And so that gave us an equal access throughout. But then, as you said, we felt like, okay, that's resulting in fewer precincts. So let's increase the number of early voting sites. We'll have 24 in this election cycle for 2024, which is going to give more access to voting in those 2 weeks of early voting. And I've always told people this. We try to get as many people as possible to vote before Election Day. Election Day, I always tell people, if the car breaks down, the kids are sick, you're sick, bad weather, there's no makeup day. There's no day I can bring a note in to Jerry and say, can I vote Wednesday? So that's why I really encourage people to take advantage of early voting, take advantage of vote by mail, and vote prior to Election Day. And that'll take away any possibility of lines on Election Day.
According to our last conversation with you about this, there were about 200,000 voters whose precinct might have changed. Is that still in flux? Might I still find out that my precinct is about to change?
Well, we've set all those precincts according to the lawsuit. What can happen is actually a polling location. We have 2 of them that's going through emergency legislation right now with the council. They're under renovation, so they won't be available in March, but they will be in August and November. So we'll make temporary changes like that where we couldn't predict that the renovations wouldn't be in time for the March election. And when we do that, we always have to, polling locations have to be approved by the city council. I can just not arbitrarily eliminate precincts or polling locations or even add without the permission of the city council.
And how were voters notified of changes in their polling place? This is a question from one of you.
Well, first of all, if your polling location changes, you'll get a new voter information card because your voter information card will contain the location of where you vote. Also on your sample ballot, when you receive that prior to an election, it will show your polling location. Those are 2 ways that voters will get notified. If it's an emergency type situation, we will, at the polling location where we told you we're going to vote, we will have someone there to direct you. And often it's very close. It's not going to be far from there. But even these polling locations that we eliminated due to the lawsuit, in the 2024 cycle, we will have a poll worker there to make sure if you come, you didn't see your voter card, you didn't look at your sample ballot, and you've come to where you've always voted and it's not a polling location anymore, there'll be a poll worker there to direct you to where your polling location is.
You said you encourage people to vote before Election Day whenever possible. So let's talk about mail ballots for a minute. Is it true that if you have voted before with a mail ballot, you need to request a new one for the new election cycle?
Well, what has changed over the last decade is Senate Bill 90 in the Florida House and Senate said that after every state or federal election that you'd have to renew your request. State or federal means the presidential election in November, the gubernatorial election that falls in November. So, for example, if you voted in 2022's election, then your request for a vote by mail ballot expired on December 31st of 2022. Then January 1st of 2023, you could be on the list for a vote by mail ballot for any election until December 31st of 2024. So that's the new thing, is you have to renew after a state or federal election.
So people can go on your website and check their status and make sure that they're requesting that mail ballot if that's the way that they'd like to vote.
Well, and also if you've requested it, say in the spring elections, and you want to make sure you're going to get it for this 2024 election cycle, on our website at duvalelections.gov, on our website there's a voter status. It will tell you your status. Are you an active voter, inactive voter, ineligible? If you've requested a vote by mail ballot, it'll show that you're signed up for vote by mail ballot for 2024. So it'll also show you your polling location. So on our website, we'll give you that good information.
Now, how are mail ballots treated? How are they counted? Are they counted before Election Day as soon as they're received? Are they counted on Election Day? How does that work?
You know what's interesting, and realize this, all states have their own election laws. So you'll hear, well, this is the way they do it in another state. It doesn't mean it's the same in our state. But in the state of Florida, one of the important things is by 7/15 election night, I am required by statute to report all the vote by mail ballots and all the early votes. So in order to do that by 7/15, they have to be tabulated prior to election night is finished. And we're actually, by state law, after the canvassing board convenes, we then are starting a process of opening those vote-by-mail ballots. They're secured until that process. They're validated by checking the signature. And whenever we count the vote-by-mail ballots, a member of the canvassing board, myself or the other two members, have to be present while we're counting those vote-by-mail ballots.
Okay, so let's talk about some myths that you might want to dispel that you've heard flying around as we go into this election year. I know, first of all, tell me where you might have heard some of these myths, and then let's go through them.
Well, some have been election urban legends for a long time. You've often, I've heard over decades, they don't even count the vote-by-mail ballots unless it's close. And the reality is they do count them, and obviously, as I mentioned, they have to be counted and tabulated by 7:15. That's one of the ones I hear. I hear often that the tabulator that we'll show later, the DS300, is hooked to the internet. It is not hooked to the internet. We'll explain each piece of equipment and what's connected to the internet and what's not, but that's some of the things.
Why would that be a concern if it was hooked to the internet?
Well, the concern often is that in any way can the results of the election be changed by way of hacking the machine, by some way of going while the election's being conducted, changing how it's tabulating, any of those things. People look at how can we look at also how will someone, one, talk about changing the election, and what exactly are the truths versus the legends and myths out there saying what can be done to the equipment.
Mm-hmm. So the rumor is, the myth that is out there is that somehow this piece of equipment is connected to the internet, allowing people to connect to it and change the vote tabulation. And you're saying that's just not possible.
It's not possible. The other thing I hear too is from one presentation a gentleman was giving, is that within the ballot, the DS300 ballot tabulator, there's a printer. And it will actually fill in the oval for the person that someone's programmed the equipment for. First of all, there is not a printer inside the DS300. There is in some states, they will use a printer inside that will actually put an initial mark to show that the ballot's been run through and that so it's not counted again. The state of Florida does not use that, so there is not a separate printer. The only printer that's in the machine is the one that prints the results at the top. And we'll show that when we present the equipment and talk more about the results and how they are sent into the office and secured.
One thing that we hear about is allegations of voter fraud. Now, voter fraud, is this something that you have seen specifically prosecuted here in Duval County? How often does this happen?
I will say I have not seen in my 10 years, and obviously I've been back only about 7 months, is I have not seen a case. I have turned over cases of fraud where someone attempted to vote twice, and I've turned over cases where people have signed petitions and they were not the person that should have been signing them. A petition gatherer actually forged signatures and turned those in. Those are the things that I've seen within Duval County. But from my colleagues throughout the state and the other 66 counties, there have been reported instances, I know in my previous tenure, of someone requesting vote-by-mail ballots and attempting to vote them, for the voters and things of that nature. But they've put a lot of laws in place to prevent that now.
I have a question from the audience. What is the process to volunteer at the polls? And before you answer that, excuse me, recently the Jacksonville Today reporting team talked with you about this, how there were not enough people who were signing up to be poll workers, basically, especially at that time on the Republican side. And because you want both major parties represented at each polling location. So how is that going now? Do you have enough poll workers, and do you need any more signups?
Well, first of all, we did have a great surge of additional poll workers for the March election. We will not staff as many poll workers in March than we will in August and November. And the reason for that is you only have Republicans that are allowed to vote in March, and so therefore the turnout overall will not be as great. So trying to be fiscally responsible, We'll staff according to the demand. But we did, one of the goals I had was the state law currently says that within every polling location, you should have not all of one party. But that doesn't mean it has to be one of the other major parties. In fact, even in March of last year, there were 6 precincts that was all made up of one party, and there was 18 precincts with one party and no party affiliation. My goal is let's have more transparency. So I raised the bar and said, in every polling location in Duval County, we will have a minimum of 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. And for that, it was so that you would have transparency, you would have both sides saying they were represented in the voting process. We did meet that for March. We will have 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats. And we will need probably more poll workers. To get involved, you go on our elections website, duvalelections.gov, and you'll see a section for poll workers. And on that, you can sign up. You have to take a 3-hour training course. You do get compensated for being a poll worker, but that starts the process by signing up.
Another audience question, what are some do's and don'ts in helping other citizens register to vote?
Well, the do's and don'ts, and this has also been a change in state statute, is that there are groups that are allowed to do voter registrations. It's called third-party voter registration organizations. And so they're allowed to go out, do voter registrations, and when you fill it out, what I call take possession of your application to turn it in. And you have to be one of these groups or our office in order to take possession of that application. Now, you can go out and do voter registration drives and give the voter the opportunity to fill it out online where they're submitting it, or giving them an application and giving it to them so they mail it back in. Our address is on the back. But unless you're a third-party voter registration organization, you cannot take possession of a voter application.
So I could not go and stand outside with a table and have a whole batch of these and then hand them to you right now?
Not and bring them into me. You could encourage people. You could have applications, have them fill it out, tell them what they need to do, but they'll have to take possession of that and turn it in.
Okay. Is the Florida presidential primary solely for Republicans to vote in?
Yes, it is. It's what's referred to as a closed primary. In the state of Florida, the Democratic candidate, the incumbent president, is not challenged in the state of Florida. So therefore, there's not any Democrats going to vote. In the Republican side, there is 7 candidates running for president. And you may ask, well, I thought some of them had suspended their campaigns. Well, first of all, withdrawing is different than suspending. In fact, we started out with 8 on the Republican side. 1 did withdraw. We have 7 now. But suspending your campaign still puts you on the ballot as a voter, a Republican voter. You can vote for any of the 7 of the candidates, even though their campaign may have been suspended. But so it is just for the Republicans to select their nominee when it goes to the convention, and then the Florida delegates will go there in support of whoever gets the majority of the votes or plurality of the votes in March.
I've had that question from a reader, is my vote thrown away if I vote right now for Ron DeSantis, for example?
Well, not in the sense that it's thrown away. It is tabulated. The governor would know how many he has, even though he suspended his campaign. So it will go into the count, and when we officially report the results, we'll report that. So unlike sometimes the candidate will withdraw after the ballot's been printed. When those cases occur, we have to put a notice inside the voting booth to let you know that if you vote in that candidate, yeah, that would be a wasted vote because we won't be tabulating a withdrawn candidate that's on the ballot. But these are all suspended candidates, and all their votes will be tabulated.
Okay. Another audience question, how do you ensure true and honest bipartisan workers and counting?
Well, it goes back to the same thing I talked about when it came to the poll workers. It's about making sure the office is made up of both parties, about during the process, everyone's represented. You know, there's so many things in the process of doing elections that is open to the public, and we want that transparency. the canvassing board meetings. What's coming up, the logic and accuracy test, when we test the equipment, is open to the public. It's about everyone seeing the process. Nothing, as we say, behind closed doors, nothing behind the curtains. Everything is out and open to the public, and that's how we assure that transparency.
We have a couple of questions here about deceased people and voter rolls. So how long does it take to remove somebody from the rolls if they have died? And can you explain how dead people supposedly are voting in elections?
I'll start with how dead people can vote in elections. One is, and it's legal, and let me explain how before you go any further. But basically, if you vote early and pass away before Election Day, your vote counts. If you vote by mail and put it in the mailbox and pass away before election, your vote counts. But that's the only way a deceased voter's vote counts. So what we do to make sure deceased voters aren't voting is to keep our rolls as clean as possible. By that I mean keeping the eligible people on the rolls and those who are no longer eligible off the rolls. We get vital statistics every week from the state. We also get notifications from loved ones if their spouses have passed away, or children or parents. And in those cases, we have to have a copy of the death certificate if someone's notifying us of a deceased person. We cannot take obituaries because, again, it's not 100% proof, but we do. If we had a group just turn in today, or actually today and yesterday, 4 different volumes of people they felt were on our rolls deceased. And we take that very serious, because what can happen is over time, maybe in vital statistics when they were processing, maybe they skipped over a voter. Maybe there was a human error and they're still on the rolls. Well, what happened was we looked these up. I had one case that I looked up today. The voter had not voted since 1988. They would have been 107 years old. But they were still on the rolls, So again, we will now, at that point, we'll look them up in the David system, which is a state, system, confirm that they're deceased, and remove them. So we'll take citizen input, just like the people brought us this information, and then also from the vital statistics. But the key is we want our rolls to be accurate. Not that any of these people that were deceased had voted, because we would have seen that in their periodic showing up at some point. What we see most of the time is deceased voters, and they haven't voted for over a decade or 2 decades, still being on the rolls. Now, what should happen is, if you're an active voter, meaning you're eligible and on the rolls, when we send out a voter information card or a sample ballot, if a loved one there writes on there deceased and sends it back, it starts the process of removing them. But a lot of times people will go, well, I can't believe the elections office keeps getting it wrong, and just throws it away. If we're sending something and it's inaccurate, meaning they're not there anymore, they've moved, the deceased, and you don't let us know, then we're probably not going to get an accuracy out of it. So that we ask for that encouragement of people when they get election mail to let us know the person is no longer alive or no longer living at the residence.
One of our guests here tonight will not be in town in November and wants to know how they can vote from overseas.
A couple different ways. One is, if you're going to be in overseas, that's what we call UACAVA, which is our overseas voters. You may qualify for that because you're an overseas, maybe you're going to have temporary residence somewhere. We produce those ballots 45 days prior to Election Day. So you could actually come in if you're going to be an overseas resident during the election or during that period of time and request an overseas ballot 45 days, up to 45 days prior to the election. If it's not going to be a residency that you're going, but you're just going to be out of town for the election, then up to 30 days prior to the election, you can come in and get a vote-by-mail ballot, vote it right there and turn it in to us, or early voting, which is normally about 2 weeks prior to the election. So you do have some opportunities. Now, the tough part is, if you're going to be gone, and you're going to be gone for more than 45 days ahead of the election, the question is where can we mail you a ballot? Because, again, we can't print any prior to those 2 particular times.
Okay, now I'd like to talk about the elections that are coming up this year, and then we're going to get a demonstration of the equipment. So we have 3 on the calendar, and this is not a comprehensive list, but I'm going to name a few of the offices up for election this year besides president, okay? So we have U.S. reps, we have state senators, state representatives, clerk of the circuit and county courts, school board races, soil and water conservation, county court judges, the Atlantic Beach mayor, Baldwin mayor, Jax Beach mayor, Neptune Beach mayor, city council seats. The list goes on and on. Okay, so who can vote in these 3 elections, and what is the purpose of the 3? And March 19th, August 20th, and November 5th are those dates.
Right. Obviously, as we talked about in March 19th, will be the Republicans voting for their selection in the convention. In August, that election will be the primary. If a candidate running for state house or state senate or even Congress doesn't have an opposing person running, let's say if they have other Republicans or Democrats running, then it will be a primary for the Republicans or Democrats. If they have opposition in November from another party or a write-in candidate, then it'll be closed just for their party. If they don't have opposition in November and you have a primary with one party, then it'll be open for everyone to vote. There'll be races for everyone. When I say that, people say, well, is the primary, and this happens a lot, is that only for Republicans and Democrats? No, your school board races, your judicial races are nonpartisan races, which means anyone can vote in those. So even if you're an NPA, no party affiliation, or minor party, there is something on the ballot in August. And then in November, anyone can vote for anyone, meaning, yes, if you're one party, you can vote for the candidate in the other party. That is the general election. And one thing I did want to say when you were talking about the number of races, when you look back at 2020, there was 40, and now sometimes there is fewer or more races than a previous election because maybe somebody was unopposed, and so therefore there's not a seat open or not anybody running. So that's why it's not exactly the same on every election. But in 2020, there was 42 different elections that we were conducting in that general election, which gave the voters, because some wasn't just a selection between 1 or 2. It was a selection, for example, for president between 8 candidates. So we had over 90 selections you could have made, And I bring this up for a reason, because there's a move now to say, why don't we just vote on election day and hand count those ballots? I did some math. We had 495,000 people vote in Duval County in 2020. If we hand counted those ballots and you gave it just 10 seconds to count each race, which would be remarkable, even if you gave it the same time as the tabulator, it would take somewhere between 15 and 90 days to tabulate the results, hand counted with 42 races and 92 selections. So I am not an advocate of hand counting on election day of that many races. So I did want to throw that out.
All right. I think we are ready. Wait, before we go see the demonstration, if we are not registered to vote as of right now, is it too late to participate in the March election?
If you're going to register and be registered Republican, you have 29 days prior to the election. So February 20th is the deadline. And always remember, in any election, you have 29 days prior to either change your party, if you're moving into a primary that you want to vote in, or to be registered to vote. So 29 days prior to the election.
Okay, not too late.
Not
to
too
participate.
late.
All right. Let's go over and check out the machines.
Well, first of all, I want to kind of tell what the machine does as well as to kind of demonstrate it. For one thing is the EVID, the check-in. And people ask, is anything connected to the internet? The EVID has to be connected to the internet. That's because the only way that we can make sure that a voter doesn't go from one early voting site to the next or from one precinct to another is to make sure that the data is live. So that as soon as you vote or as soon as you ask for a ballot, as soon as you check in, it now knows the system. So if you go somewhere else, it immediately tells that poll worker you've already voted. Or you voted by mail. It tells the system that we've already received your ballot if you come in and say, I want to vote today. Now remember this, you always have an opportunity to vote. By that I mean this. Let's say you forgot you mailed in your vote by mail ballot and you're convinced you didn't mail it, okay, and you come into the polling locations. They're not going to turn you away, but they're going to require you to vote a provisional ballot. A provisional ballot lets you fill out the ballot, put it in an envelope, put your reasoning why you think it ought to count, which is, I didn't vote by mail, even though your system says it voted by mail. That allows the canvassing board and staff to research. We will pull up the vote by mail ballot that we say that we have, look at the signature, and see how it matches your signature, and let you know you just forgot. I will say, since I've been doing the elections, 100% accuracy on provisional ballots when people say, I have not voted, but the system says it's voted. But we have elderly voters. Sometimes they forget, and I totally understand that. So, but you never turned away that you can't get an opportunity to fill out that ballot, because we want you to have your opportunity to make sure that we both have to present evidence and prove that your ballot needs to be counted if it's provisional or doesn't need to count. So the EVID system is connected to a private Wi-Fi, not public Wi-Fi, throughout the day. And so as a voter comes in, the poll worker will ask for an ID. Remember, in the state of Florida, you have to provide, it's one of 8 different IDs, one being most often is the driver's license or Florida ID. There are other IDs. And if you don't have one, it doesn't mean, once again, you're not turned away. But if you have no ID, you must vote provisional. Because again, we have no way to identify that you are the person you're saying you are. Now, if you vote provisional without an ID, you're allowed to come into the canvassing board, present that ID, and show that you just weren't there and didn't have your ID, and then the ballot would be counted. So as you check in, what it has the opportunity to do is pull up voters during that process, check to make sure that you haven't already voted, and if you haven't, then it prints. Now this is printing an express vote. What it does in the express vote ballot is it's indicating where you're located as far as which ballot you should get. And then you're going over next. This is if you're voting early, you'll be voting with an express ballot, or if you requested one during election day. And then at the express vote, you'll put that in. Now, if someone was visually impaired, they actually have the ability to have earphones and listen to the ballot. Even if they're visually impaired, also the keypad has Braille touch tone on that. It even has the puff and sift if you were a quadriplegic or didn't have use of your arms or legs to use another apparatus. So it's for people to be able to vote in privacy, and also to allow us to be able to use that in any early voting site. So what Jennifer's doing is she's making selections. It'll show the selection, it'll recap, let you know what you voted on, and then when you actually select, yes, I want to cast this ballot, it'll do 2 things. It will print out all your results on that ballot. Remember, this machine is not tabulating. This machine is just filling out your ballot for you. Only the DS300 will tabulate. This machine is not connected to any internet whatsoever. The printer is also internal. I saw one report where in Georgia they were saying, but this is connected to an outside printer and there's Wi-Fi connection. That may be the case in Georgia, but in our particular express vote, the printer is inside, hardwired, and it does not use a wireless connection. Now, when you come over to the tabulator, again, this is where you're used to putting your ballot in, as well as your express vote. The express vote goes up in the top, and obviously, as we present that, one thing to always look at, because people will go, how do I know it counted my ballot? When you go to look at a DS300, there'll be 2 counts on that. At the top will be the ballot count. That's important because at the beginning of the day, poll workers know this. It must have 0 on the ballot count. That means there's no votes inside that machine. And then the other is the historical number of ballots that's run through that. and that helps our process to know how many ballots have been run through for both maintenance and other reasons. But I think what's important is, how do we get the results? Because that's where you hear most of the conspiracy, and the thoughts is somehow when you finish voting, that somehow when the results were reported and tabulated, they weren't true results. Well, let me tell you, there's 4 ways those results are done. It's not just one. At the end of the night, when the poll worker is finished, the poll worker will print 2 result tapes showing all the results on that machine for that day. They will post one of them on the door of the polling location, and the other they will put in a sealed bag and send into the office. That's the first evidence of the votes that were cast are the votes that are going to be sent in. So you've got that proof of evidence. The next proof of evidence is there is a thumb drive right on the outside. The poll worker has a lock key to open that up. They will remove the thumb drive. The thumb drive will be put into a secure bag, sealed up, and then also sent in to election night. The third thing is the ballots themselves. So all elections in the state of Florida are cast on a paper ballot, which means you can reconstruct an election by going back and counting those ballots. Okay? And the fourth way is to get unofficial results in so that I can report by 7:30, these are unofficial results, is there is a modem in there, not connected to the internet throughout the day. At the end of the night, there is a process called a virtual private network. And rather than get into all the exact details that are kind of a secured process, it goes basically in a millisecond, notifies our election center. It notifies that it's coming from this machine. It knows the address here, knows the address there, sends the unofficial results. So now you have the unofficial results. They can be matched to the printed results. They can be matched to the thumb drive. And it also, at the end of the day, matched to the ballots. So the thought that anyone could change anything in that process would have to change something entirely in that process. By that, and I mentioned earlier, is the logic and accuracy test. You say, well, how do I know that the machines aren't being programmed? So when I vote for candidate A, it's giving the candidate B my vote. Well, that's done when we do our logic and accuracy tests, and that's open to the public. And basically what we'll do, we'll have a test deck of ballots saying so many votes for every candidate. We will then take the machine. It will have 0 votes on it. We'll run those through, print a result tape to show that it's actually casting those votes for those candidates and how many should have been added up. As soon as that's finished, we'll take the results, 0 it back out. We seal the equipment. See, what's important is not just the chain of custody of the ballots, but also the chain of custody of the machines. So the machines are sealed so that no one can have access to that. The poll workers know if that machine comes out and the seal's broken, you cannot use it. So no one has that access since we've done the logic and accuracy test. It's sealed at that point. The other side also, because the thought of, well, maybe someone's adding ballots. Well, that's the good thing on the EVIDs. End of the night, the EVID says 200 people voted. There ought to be 200 ballots there. So we reconcile that. There is an accounting sheet, a balance sheet at the end of the night, and they have to reconcile for every number of voter how many ballots were given. If 200 voters voted and there's 205 ballots, that has been, because we have a ballot, they tear it off and the stub has a number. But all of a sudden we look at the stub numbers and they write down the beginning and ending of the stub numbers and it shows 205. Well, there better be 5 spoiled ballots, which means if you go and make a mistake, you can get another ballot, but they tear the one that made the mistake. So we can account for every ballot at the precinct, and all those are sent back in. The key is before we go home on election night, all those key things have to be brought back in. And they're not just brought back in by any random person. Jacksonville Sheriff's Office actually brings in all that equipment, escorts the truck in. Anytime if they go to a drop zone to drop those off, 2 poll workers go with them to drop those off. So you always have a chain of custody. They're in sealed bags. If they come to us when we get them at the election center and they've been open, then we stop that, set those aside, want to know from the poll workers why they were open or why anyone touched it. So chain of custody is so important. Tabulation is important to make sure there's multiple results of the same thing. And then the best thing in the state of Florida After elections are done, we do a post-election audit of the ballots. So what happens is the canvassing board, made up of myself, a county judge, and someone from the city council, the county judge will randomly select a race on that ballot and randomly select precincts. We will pull those ballots, and staff will hand count them in front of the public and everyone else to see if the hand count matches the machine count. So, and I will say, in the 10 years prior, it's always been 100% exactly the same on the hand count as we did to the machine count on the post-election audit. So those are just a few things that we do. And as I mentioned on a vote-by-mail ballot, they're also secured within our office. They're only open when the canvassing board is there. They also are multiple parties there. It's open to the public when we feed those ballots through. We do not do any feeding of ballots without the public being noticed that we're doing it, and they're invited to watch us do that. So you don't get one of these things like you saw from some states where all of a sudden they stopped counting ballots and then they came back at 3 in the morning and started counting ballots. Can't do that in the state of Florida. You have to let people know when you're going to do it, and it has to be open to the public. So those are just a few of the things that we feel makes our elections in the state of Florida and Duval County very safe.
Mr. Holland, this machine, the express vote, is this what everybody will use in early voting, or is this just for people with disabilities?
No, in early voting, everyone will use the express vote. On election day, it's only by your request that you want to use an express vote.
Okay, so on election day, you can fill out a paper
We'll have
ballot.
a ballot already there pre-printed with the races and ovals, and you fill that out on election day.
Okay, so touch screen on early voting.
And again, touchscreen only to fill out the ballot. A lot of years ago, we used to have touchscreens that actually tabulated the vote, and there was never a paper ballot. This actually has the paper ballot that will be in the machine and kept for all the other ballots.
And that is what goes into the tabulator
Yes.
at the end. Okay. After this, you all are invited to come up and fill out a sample ballot and go through the process yourself and ask additional questions if you would like of Mr. Holland and his staff. That concludes the presentation. So thank you very much for being here tonight. Thank you,
Appreciate
Supervisor.
it. Thank y'all.
And I would like to invite all of you, if you have not already signed up for the Jacksonville Today newsletter. The Jacksonville Today newsletter, I am the editor of. It comes to your inbox every Monday through Friday. It is free, and one of the cornerstones of what we're doing is voter guides. There will be plenty to include in those guides this year, and if you would like to read through those before these elections this year, please sign up at jaxtoday.org. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.